What's up, Black Comic Lords? Once again, we're on with our Black Comic Creator Interview Series. Tonight, we have a special guest. He's been on here just recently before with his squad, but he's here solo because he's a talent in his own right, of course. And honestly, he's the baddest mofo in comics. Mr. David F. Walker. F stands for something that I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, it's not important. It's not important. This is the writer of such dope books as Shaft, the hated, Cyborg, Bitterroot, Planet of the Apes, co-creator of Naomi. Just his resume is crazy. Enough of me talking. Mr. David F. Walker.
What's up? How you doing?
How are you?
I'm doing good. It's I'm down in LA. I was just at WonderCon yesterday, chilling, and down here also to do research for a new top secret project and just enjoying life, man. Like, it's easy to get caught up in the negative. I'm not going to let that happen right now. I'm with you. You know, Black Comics Lords, the people are coming in, and Sexual Chocolate is here. You know, like, what more do you want?
Man, if you were more chill or mellow, I'd probably just, I don't even know what I'd do. You are
also the creator of Street Magic and Marvel. Thank you, Electric.
Oh Blade. Yes, what is his name? El Magico.
Yeah.
We gotta get into it. We gotta get into it because I mean it. You are the baddest mofo in comics, man. I mean, I think back in the day, you and I could have gotten up on a Saturday morning and watch some blaxploitation films and kung fu flicks and with a big bowl of cereal and be cool.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, I can still do that, man. You know?
All right, so let's get into it. Dr. Wizard, let's bring up some stuff. All right, as I said, your resume is way too long for me to put into the time that we have here, and I don't want to make everybody hate me. But I had to hit out some of the highlights from that we talk about in our space all the time. Your Luke Cage run, Shaft, with your covers with Dennis Cowan, which are all fantastic. The Hated, for the Western genre. I was happy to get that on. I think it was on a Kickstarter or something way back in the day. Your Cyborg run, which I've talked about before in the space. You were probably one of the first writers to write Victor Stone in a way that emphasized his humanity over his cyborg parts. Like, you, would it be wrong for me to say you're my favorite cyborg writer of all time? I don't care. Yes, you're my favorite cyborg writer of all time, because you really you did something very simple. So let's use the nanites. We have nanites, and let's have him look like he's human and try to explore that aspect of him. And it's something I think that should have been explored more and made more canon and continued on with other subsequent writers. But anyway, I digress.
Well, I will say this about Cyborg really quick. What I'll say was that my whole goal from the beginning was, I love the character even when I was a kid, you know, and I'm old enough to remember when he was first introduced in New Teen Titans back in the 80s. But it was just always like, with so many Black characters, and this is going to be a recurring thing during this conversation, with so many Black characters that we see in pop culture, like, their humanity is never there, right? It always feels like they're written by, you know, creators who, like, maybe they know one Black person, you know?
Yeah.
And I was just like, when I had that opportunity, I was like, I'm gonna, especially with Victor Stone, because even the notes DC was giving me was like taking him further away from his humanity, and that's what makes him compelling, right?
Yes.
Like, we as Black folks are always having our humanity taken from us,
right? And it's so easy to do that with that particular character. I love the fact when you have a writer who's willing to write him with soul. And I'm not talking Black soul. I'm just talking human soul. Like, they take away his human soul. And I hate that about it. And it's not it's not something that's necessary for him as a character, I don't think. Anyway.
I would agree.
Also co-creator of Naomi.
Yep.
Did you like the television, what they did with the television show? Did you have any input on that?
No, almost no input at all. In fact, no input at all. Like, and so if you ever hear me in an interview or read an interview with me and I talk about having input, that was because they pressured me into lying. And so the input was literally my lawyer calling up Warner Brothers and going, you need to make sure his name is in the credits and he gets paid. And that was a long ongoing battle with them. So
name needs to be in the credits for him to get paid, not necessarily to be attributed to the quality of what was done with the work that he did in the comics. Yeah.
So it was, there was aspects of the show that I appreciated, and it was a great learning experience for me. And I learned, my feeling is no experience is bad as long as you learn from it and it doesn't kill you.
Yeah. I think it's universally held by every person who I've ever seen talk about the show that they really did not like how much it had diverged from what you guys wrote.
Yes.
I think that's the most consistent criticism of the show. Everyone was excited about the show. Everybody was excited about the show. I mean, it had an audience already set up for it. You could do no wrong, but then they shied away from what you wrote, and it's kind of like, well, then you pissed off your audience, and what happened.
And I like I like some of the cast. I didn't like all the cast. I like the young lady who played Naomi. I thought she was really solid. But I think there's a danger in when you think, oh, I can improve on the subject matter, and you don't have a real game plan for improving on the subject matter, right? Like, I mean, I just did a rewrite of a reimagining of Mark Twain, right? And so it was like, yeah, I had to have a good plan. I couldn't just go, oh, I'm going to do something different. And that's what a lot of people tend to do. They think, and I think that a lot of the people involved with the Naomi TV show, my theory is that they don't really respect comics. And you can see that a lot of times when you see certain movies, TV shows, whatever, like where they don't take comics seriously. And that's always frustrating.
Do you know if that's ever, do you have any idea if it's ever coming back, if Naomi as a character is coming back? Because she kind of disappeared after that Justice League run.
Well, Brian and Jamal and we did a second story arc. We did season 2. But the writing was kind of on the wall that Brian was probably not going to stay at DC much longer.
Right.
And I was only working at DC because I was working with Brian on Naomi. There was already enough, I won't say bad blood between myself and people at DC, but there was some tension there. And so, Brian Bendis, one of my oldest friends, we've been friends for coming up on 30 years. We'd been wanting to do something together. This was it. There'd been talk of something at Marvel, but then he left Marvel. And so Naomi was it was like one of the most special projects I've ever worked on for a whole host of reasons. And, DC didn't really get behind season 2 the way we'd hoped. And so then it was like a question of, well, what do we do with this character? Like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there'll be some young creator. Maybe they're listening right now, and they're going to have DC's going to come to them. And they're going to be like, what do you want to do? And they'll say, I want to bring back Naomi. And they'll be like, no, we don't want you to do that. And, it's like, I'd love to see her brought back. I'd love to see somebody do something with her. But what you want ultimately is people to respect your characters, right? And not just respect your characters, but when your character is a young Black woman, it's really important that for me that she be respected, right? Because I don't feel that in real life, I don't feel young Black women are getting respected. But especially in comics, most of in mainstream comics, most of those young Black women were, recently, a good percentage of them were created or co-created by Brian Bendis, so and that a lot of that comes from him seeing a need as a parent with his 2 daughters who are older now, but it's a whole other story.
Right. All right. You also did Planet of the Apes, which is one of the more critical versions, critically acclaimed versions of Planet of the Apes, which is dope. Your Power Man and Iron Fist is a necessity for every Luke Cage fan, every Iron Fist fan. It was just a fun book, man. You just, when I talk about the blaxploitation motif, I felt like it was like a throwback book. I mean, it was set in modern era, but it was definitely a throwback vibe, which I really appreciated. And you developed El Magico, which is a character which I think a lot of writers are remiss in not taking advantage of such a dope ass character as Magico.
There was a few in that run. There was the Disco Devil was another one who I created, and there's I created all these little side supporting characters during my time at Marvel that was like I was like, man, I wish somebody would do something with these characters. So oh god, yeah, Alex, no, it's not Walker. He was from Runaways. Alex Wilder. Yeah, that was a character I wanted to do so much with, and like Marvel was like they didn't want it, and I think part of it was because the TV show was coming, but I was like, he has the power and he has the capability to be like a major player, a major villain, and it's funny, man. I like, as a side note, I'd hit DC up at one point when I was still on decent terms with them, and I'd pitch them basically a Super Friends series with Black Vulcan, Apache Chief. There was I can't remember. There was an samurai. And then there was a third one. There was he was like almost like a luchador. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it was like a matador type. No, like a lucha, like you said, like a lucha character.
He didn't wear a mask, but like it was 4 of the worst stereotypes you could possibly imagine. But everybody loves those characters, right? And so I pitched this to DC, and they were like, these characters are too problematic to do anything with. And I was like, yeah, that's why I'm pitching this. Like, it's time. Yes, it's El Maya. I was like, it's time that we undid that. And I was like, and if there's one guy in this industry who can make those characters respectable and funny and poke fun at it, but also like turn that corner, it's me. And they were like, no, you can't do it. And I was like, yeah, I can't do it because you won't let me do it. And that was kind of one of the last conversations I had with them.
Damn, that now that you've mentioned that, now I'm like, I can see it. I can see you writing that book and making it dope.
Yeah. No, and the whole premise was something happens, the rest of the Super Friends, and they're like out of commission, and it's up to basically the Super Friends of diversity to turn it around and to save everybody, and if there was a time, the time to have done this book would have been like 5-10 years ago. Now they're never going to do that book.
Yeah, not in our climate, which we have right now, which we're going to talk about in a sec. Yeah. Particularly with regard to Bitterroot, your double Eisner Award-winning book that a few people might have heard of.
Just a few.
Just a few. But, let's talk about what you have upcoming.
Okay.
The Death of Bobby Hart, true crime story. Let me tell you something. This is I guess I'm a sucker for the whole blaxploitation era, having grown up in the 70s. Dolomite, Superfly, this that's the stuff I grew up on, man. It's and you get that vibe, and you basically write the story from the very beginning. Yeah. You've got Beretta and John Shaft as 2 investigating officers. You did not hide this. You didn't even attempt to hide the fact that you have Beretta and John Shaft as the 2 investigating officers of this writer who's murdered.
Yeah.
And this writer who's murdered writes a book called Pimp Wars by Bobby Hart, which, me being a blaxploitation file, know that this is really Iceberg Slim. Try and deny it. It's Iceberg Slim, isn't it?
Technically, it's more Donald Goines than Iceberg Slim.
Okay.
But it's and Donald Goines was sort of a protege of Iceberg Slim, and he was famously murdered, and this is inspired by that, by his life and his murder, and
Uh,
so
straight pimp game, straight pimp game. And then, you know, jeez, he's got the Ghetto Avenger book.
Yeah.
Who's Ghetto Avenger supposed to be inspired by?
Ghetto Avenger is like, if you read any of Donald Goines' books, or there's a publisher called Holloway House in the 70s, and they were like the number one publisher of what they called Black experience novels.
Yeah.
And they were all like, if you took any blaxploitation movie you could think of and you turn the volume up to like 25, right? That was Holloway House. And so this was really like a throwback to that. And the Ghetto Avenger is very much like, there was a writer named Joseph Nizel who wrote for Holloway House, and he had a series called The Iceman. And then Roosevelt Mallory had the Radcliffe series, and there was all these series. There were these pulp series of very much like what the white writers like Don Pendleton did with The Executioner, and all these books are out of print now, right? And Donald Goines had a series of 4 books starring Kenyatta, and Kenyatta was like this vigilante who went around and killed like drug dealers and pimps, and then he goes after the CIA, and so that's really where that's where the idea for the Ghetto Avenger came from. Because in film, I'll be 100% honest with you, in film, nobody went far enough. Like, as much as I love those movies, they only could go so far. And
Right.
Once I discovered these books, I got a little bit older. I discovered Iceberg Slim. I discovered Donald Goines, Roosevelt Mallory, Joe Nizel. And I'm like reading these books, and I'm going, yo, wait a minute. Like, this is this is the uncut stuff. This is the pure stuff, you know.
It's the really real.
Yeah.
All right. But then you also, from a character standpoint, you got a dude here reminds me very much of like a Luke Cage, but in LA. Like if Luke Cage wasn't in Harlem, but he was in LA instead, he would be very much like, not without superpowers, but Rosie Stone. In terms of his attitude and his background, kind of a Luke Cage / John Shaft type dude. But you also change the style up a bit. You go from a pure comic book format to more of a prose style. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an idea that's been kicking around for years, and I wanted to do a story that was about the writer, and then it was about the book he was writing, and that you would see bits and pieces of this book that he was writing, and that hopefully both narratives would sort of come together at some point. And it was I think I did it. I think I succeeded with it. But I wanted to have the main character, Bobby Hart, the writer. He's working on this novel, the Ghetto Avenger novel. This is like the 4th one in the Ghetto Avenger series, right? And it's like the Ghetto Avenger is his alter ego. It's like who he really wishes he was as a person. And did you ever see the movie Trouble Man with Robert Hooks? And Marvin Gaye did the soundtrack. It was directed by Ivan Dixon, and I love that movie. Right? It's one of my favorite blaxploitation movies. It's set in L.A. and it's kind of like if Shaft was set in L.A. And Robert Hooks, hate to say this, but Robert Hooks should have played Shaft. Right? Of all the black actors that were out there. And so if there's a movie that I took a lot of inspiration from, the 2 movies would be Trouble Man and Gordon's War. Gordon's War starred Paul Winfield, and it was just like, it's basically there's a lot of those 70s movies where it's like the vigilante who's like out to kill the dope dealers, right? But it's usually white dudes killing black dope dealers. You watch Death Wish, and it's just like, it's just Charles Bronson killing black folks, black and brown folks. It's like, I want to play around with this a little bit more, and I wanted to get into what it's like to be a creative, and what it's like to be a black creative in an industry that's controlled by white folks, and that's really a lot of what this book is about.
In a city that knew him as the Ghetto Avenger, Rosie Stone was the baddest nigga on the streets of Los Angeles. Rosie Stone walked the streets as if he owned them, and as much as any man could claim ownership of the crisscrossing arteries that connected the crippling poverty of Watts to the blinding riches of Beverly Hills, the streets actually did belong to him. It's like I want to like I can't play that music because my producer will punch me in the face because we're gonna get tagged with copyright. But damn, this is like a whole vibe. Just that one paragraph. And then you throw in sort of the more John Shaft elements. You know, becomes a hero. He works for the man, but he doesn't want to be the man.
Yeah,
he's working for the man. He'll take the man's money only because it fits his agenda. You know, his mission. I was excited by this, man. I already signed up for the Kickstarter. I mean, I'm ready to go.
I appreciate it. I really do. And I'll tell you what's funny is, so I gave an early PDF to some of the other creators I know, some of the other writers. I was looking not just for feedback, but looking for inconsistencies, all that sort of stuff, right? And again, going back to Brian Bendis, one of my oldest friends, he calls me up afterwards and he was like, "Oh man, this is amazing." He was like, "But the novel that appears within the graphic novel," he was like, "You wrote the whole thing, right?" And I was like, "No, I just wrote those 4 chapters." And he was like, "How did you do that?" And I was like, "I just figured out what were 4 key scenes from, you know, I imagined that it was going to be like a 25 chapter novel. And I was like, what are the 4 elemental scenes? Outline those." And he was like, "I want to read the whole book." And I was like, huh. And it was fun to write. I mean, I love writing that sort of pulpy, you know.
Right.
That,
you even added like the Courier font.
Yeah.
The little detail of the Courier font. I'm like, oh, that's so on point. You like he's doing the details to it.
Yeah. I got carried away for sure. And at one point I wasn't going to do the spot illustrations. But as I started thinking about it, as it was coming together, there's an artist on that I just happened to meet through Instagram named Craig Johnson II. And I was really liking the pieces that he was doing. We were, you know, emailing back and forth, messaging back and forth. And I was like, yo, I got this idea, you know, I'm doing this thing, and a lot of pulp novels, they didn't do it in the 70s, but if you go back further, especially into the 40s, 30s, 40s, and even in the 50s, a lot of times pulp novels that when they were published originally in magazines would have spot illustrations. And so I was like, yo, I got to do this, right? So I reached out to Craig, and he was down, and then it just became something more. Then it really started getting away from me. So
love it, man. I'm looking forward to this. So after I read that, I was like, it put me in a mindset. I'm like, I know I got David Walker coming on. I just read this Bobby Hart thing, and I'm hearing the 70s soundtracks in my head. And I'm like, what else? What other type of black superhero in the ghetto that I need to think about at this moment? And last time you were here, I told you how much I really loved Nighthawk, man. I mean, I honestly have no idea how you got away with this with Marvel. I'm still puzzled how you got this past editorial. This is the most hardcore. I can't think of another character this more hardcore than him in Marvel's history. I just can't.
If you'd have to go to either like a Marvel Knights run or something like that, maybe they did through their Epic imprint back in the 80s. You'd have to go, you'd have to dig pretty hard. And I don't know for sure if I've ever seen anything. When they brought me on to do Nighthawk, it was kind of weird because they hired me to do Nighthawk first, and then they gave me Power Man and Iron Fist, and they switched the schedule, and they were like, Power Man and Iron Fist is going to drop first. So I had to switch my schedule around and focus on Power Man and Iron Fist. And Nighthawk was like, it was very clear from the beginning that they wanted like something akin to Batman Court of Owls, right? Like that's what they kept pushing me to do.
Right.
But they also wanted something really dark and gritty, and you know, everyone had read my Shaft stuff over at Dynamite, and so they were like, "Oh, we want you to go dark. We want you to go gritty." And I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." And then I did, and then they were like, "Oh, hey, this is too dark. This is too gritty," right?
Well, so there was somebody did acknowledge at one point, like, this is like much.
Yeah. There was and there was a lot of stuff, and I'm gonna be, I'll talk about some of it here, but I recently started a Patreon, and what's going to happen with the Patreon is I'm gonna have PDFs of a lot of the scripts that I wrote over the years for Marvel, DC, Dynamite. That'll be available, and then you can sort of compare what I originally wrote to the changes that got made later. But I'm also going to record audio commentaries for all of them, because that's where the stories really, like, it's like I tell some people, my friend John Jennings, who's an amazing writer and artist, educator, he's always talking to me about Nighthawk, and he'll be like, "Yeah, tell me about that second arc again that you didn't get to do." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I'll tell you all about it." I don't know. I think that, and maybe this is me being a little bit cynical. I don't think that Marvel ever really knew what they were doing when they were bringing back Squadron Supreme.
Yeah.
So there was going to be the team book. Then Hyperion was getting a book. Nighthawk was getting a book. There was talk of like 2 or 3 other books, and I don't think they ever really planned it out properly. And the whole thing was like all of those characters were going to be in the 616 universe, and I was like, why? Just keep them. But this was after one of the Secret Wars events where all the universes collapsed in on each other. And I was like, all right, but it was very clear. They were giving us a lot of leeway. This is, when I say us, I mean everyone that was working on the sort of Squadron Supreme books. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to write the best book I possibly can. That's always my philosophy. And at Marvel, there was just a lot of pushback. There was more pushback on Nighthawk than anything else. And then in the end, the book gets canceled prematurely, and it was like, yeah, all this pushback you guys gave me was for nothing. And it's interesting because some of the stuff that didn't make it into Nighthawk, I was able to repurpose later on and put into Power Man and Iron Fist. Because originally, Alex Wilder from the Runaways was going to be the main villain of Nighthawk.
Really?
The Alex Wilder that we see in Power Man and Iron Fist, who's like has made a deal with the devil and all this sort of stuff, and is like he was going to be the villain. And we were like, somewhere there might even be a draft of a script. I haven't been able to find that one with Alex. I know there's the pitch, all the pitches, and then last minute it was like no, we're not going to use him. You got to use somebody else. And I was like, okay. And we kind of went back and forth, and then I came upon the Revelator as a character I created. And the thing that nobody realizes is that whatever Raymond Kane or whatever his name is, Nighthawk, because it was Kyle Richmond, but then they changed it to Raymond Kane.
Right, because this right here is the original Nighthawk.
Yes.
No one's seeing this guy bump in the night and is shaking in fear. I mean, this guy looks like a circus clown.
Yes. And he's very much a product of the 70s, right, which was when Squadron Supreme was first created. And then early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, it was either Marvel Max or Marvel Knights. They did a Squadron Supreme reboot, right?
Right.
And that was where you get the Raymond Kane / Kyle Richmond Nighthawk, and who was written like the angry black man as imagined by white people, right?
Yes, that's why I brought up this page right here. So this sounds very benign and very Marvel-y. Soul survivor, cataclysm. He's fighting corruption, injustice in a city plagued with escalating racial tension, feared by criminals, hated by police. He's going to save the city from itself, even if he has to destroy everything in his path. Like, that sounds benign and very Marvel-like.
Yes.
And it's kind of like what you get after you turn the page.
Yeah.
Is this. You got the dude beating up all these racist, white supremacist guys in Yeezys, by the way. Someone mentions he's wearing Yeezys. I'm not certain how the artist did that, but that's... And then you bring back Tilda Johnson.
Yes.
For those who don't know who Tilda Johnson is, she's also known as Nightshade.
The deadly Nightshade.
The deadly Nightshade.
Yes. Who is, for those of you that don't know, Tilda Johnson, the deadly Nightshade, is the world's leading robotics expert, and she hangs out with werewolves, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you see her wearing there is what she wore in every appearance that she did. And she was in an era where there was always problematic characters, like a lot of problematic female characters. She was like one of the worst, right? And I, but I loved her. I was like, every comic that she appeared in, I was like, there are no black women like this. She's very clearly meant to be like a Pam Grier sort of character,
right?
But she was,
but brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. But she always wears a leather bikini, and it was just like, and I had a list at one point of pretty much every black character Marvel had, that had some significant role in the Marvel universe, especially with the villains. And I was like, how many of these can I not rehabilitate, but sort of reinvent so that they're not, because when you talk to black fans, right, especially of a certain age or people who really did go further back and study this stuff, like all the villains in Luke Cage, they were always ridiculous, Black Mariah, Piranha Jones, Cockroach Hamilton, all of them. And they were kind of funny, but they were also really offensive. And I was like, what if we turned it around? What if we gave them a level of humanity they've never had before? And Tilda was at the top of the list. Tilda was always at the top of the list. And so when we were doing Nighthawk, we were talking about having, it was essentially Batman, right? There was never going to be a Robin, but we were talking, they were like, oh, he should have an Oracle. He should have someone like his Barbara Gordon. And I was like, it's Tilda Johnson. And they were like, who's that? And I was like, let me tell you. And I had so much fun writing her because I was like, she was a character that already existed, but was dying to be reimagined.
Right. And you did it really well.
Yeah.
Well, I like this page in particular, and I'll just read this here. It says, this is him having a flashback, Raymond Kane having a flashback with his parents who were murdered by racists. And he says, honey, I know you're upset. Your father and I understand how you feel. We feel the exact same way. There's a lot to be angry about. But son, this rage you feel, it will eat you up if you let it. It will turn you into something you are not supposed to be and something you can't control. It'll make you destructive, and all that violence will take over who you really are. And baby, you're much more than that. That part kind of resonated with me because it also made me think about, some themes that I've seen in your writing, right? Because you have the same theme in Bitterroot. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole concept of what you have in Bitterroot is the idea that this racial animus or it can turn to rage. It's like in Star Wars, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads, that type of thing where, your anger and your fear and your hate that comes out of the injustice that you've experienced can be self-destructive in its own way. I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and you got to decide what you want to do with that. Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I tell people all the time, they don't believe it, but like I'm the angriest person. Like there's that scene in the first Avengers movie where Bruce Banner's like, here's the secret. I'm always angry, right? Like that's me, and I was, I remember my mom had to put me into like an anger management program. I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. And, cause I was getting into a lot of fights. And then what happened? I got into a fight in the anger management program and I got kicked out of it. But part of that rage that I was feeling as a kid was like, I didn't understand, so I'm now they call it biracial, but back then it was like I was either a zebra or an Oreo cookie, whatever you wanted to call it, right? I was raised by my paternal grandparents and my mother. My paternal grandparents were black. My mom was white. So I was raised in this like little oasis of blackness on the East Coast. surrounded by a lot of whiteness, right? And my blackness was always being called into question. I was always being challenged. I was always getting into fights, and that led to this rage, right? And I can look at it now. I look at like a lot of the fights that I got into, a lot of the trouble that I got into, and it was like y'all made me into something I wasn't supposed to be. Like, and by that I mean society, I mean the teachers, I mean the white racists that surrounded me. And that's what happens to most of us, right? You hit the nail on the head. That's what Bitterroot is about, right? Bitterroot is about the monsters that we become because we're treated like monsters anyway, right? Like, we don't want to slip into it. We don't want to get angry. We don't want to, and that becomes the fundamental, that was one of the fundamental ideological splits between, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And it was like, you don't give in to, you don't fight hate with hate. And it's like, well, then what do you fight it with? And so I don't necessarily have the answer, but I find that conflict really interesting. And when you look at Nighthawk, Nighthawk is Batman, right? He is Bruce Wayne, except he's black, right? And that changes everything. That changes everything because, and I said this to Marvel from the beginning, I said, if you want me to write this story and you want to be true and honest, like, at least some of the bad guys have to be the cops, because you can't have a black superhero who's completely on the side of law and order, because law and order is the enemy. And like, that shocked, once I said that kind of shocked everybody, but they were like, oh, okay, yeah, go there. But then the more I went there, the more they were like, yo, I don't know if we can do this. And I was like,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, that parallel between him and Batman specifically, because with Bruce Wayne, they both lost their parents due to violence, right? Yeah. And so there's already that factor of, well, I want to fight crime. Fine. But then you have this added element of, Bruce Wayne's parents were killed over, $20 and a string of pearls.
Yeah.
His parents were killed for being black, for all intents and purposes. Yeah. So you have that racial element that's added to it. And it seems even more petty than something as logical as, I'm poor and I need to get money, so I'm stealing it from the rich person.
Yeah. This
is beyond that. And so his rage and his hate and anger is a lot more complex. And then when he's already fighting crime, and then he sees those people that are supposed to be helping to fight crime be the ones who are causing the same type of injustice as his parents experience, he takes that kind of personally.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the difference is Bruce Wayne is like, oh, I'm not going to kill people.
Yeah.
This dude is like, I have no problems with that, actually. Yeah.
There would have been a lot more killing if I could have gotten away with it, but there was a lot of, just break the bones, just stuff like that.
He's breaking bones, he's snapping necks, he's breaking backs. I mean, there's one scene, I didn't show it here, but there's one scene where literally he's going up against a dirty cop and he just snaps a dude's neck. And his partner's like, well, I got to take you in. Like, he's like, understand, this is the guy that already shot you. He shot somebody else. Yeah. He was going to kill other people. And I just saved your life by killing a guy who was going to kill you. And he was a dirty cop on top of it. So no, you're not going to arrest me. I'm not going to allow you to arrest me because he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Batman doesn't do that. And I got no problems with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it was a very, again, this was a challenging title to write. There was a lot of editorial pushback, a lot of conflict. The book got canceled prematurely, and even down to the slide you just were on a moment ago with the Revelator.
Yeah,
who's one of the villains. Like, the Revelator is supposed to be the 616 version of Raymond Kane / Kyle Richmond. They're the same person. Mm. And like, Marvel would never sign off on that for whatever reason. And so I remember talking to Ramon, the artist, and I said, look, man, just so you know, they're the same guy. And you like, just go ahead and do it. And I kept saying it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And I'm not gonna lie, I stole the idea. There's a Batman comic in the 80s. I think it came out in 1984. And this is my nerd, putting my nerd hat on. It was written by, I believe, Mike Barr, and it was drawn by Michael Golden. It's one of my favorite Batman comics of all time. It was like a giant size annual. And there was a character that was introduced to, the premise was that at the exact same moment Bruce Wayne's parents were murdered by Joe Chill, this other guy's parents were killed by the cops. And so he's like the anti-Batman. And it was just like, I remember reading it when I was in high school, and it just sort of blew my mind. And I loved this, and it was called The Player on the Other Side. And I loved the idea of like, oh, let's explore where I wanted Nighthawk to go. Was I wanted to eventually reveal that the Revelator was the exact same guy. Yeah. They had the exact same origin, but he just was like, I'm just gonna go out and straight up kill people, right? And at some point it meant that when they fought, that internal conflict that so many of us feel, that ideological conflict that when people talk about, oh, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, is like, I can make this real on the page. And it never happened.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was what was the difference between the two guys? Because the difference is very nuanced.
Yeah.
Nighthawk would go out in the night and fight crime.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it was. And if it so happened that it was a cop, he would still fight that crime. Yeah. The only difference between him and Revelator is that he doesn't go out of his way to kill people. He'll kill you in self-defense if you take it too far, what have you. But he's not, his first intent isn't to kill somebody. He's fine with breaking a bone or a leg or whatever. Revelator, he goes out and he just wants to, it's like the Punisher, it's like Frank Castle. The only punishment is death.
Yeah.
And he's specifically targeting white people, you know.
And they were all like, you know, questionable. There were people that were doing questionable things. They were, you know, bad landlords, and they were corrupt cops as well. And that was the whole thing. It was like, I was thinking very much like the Punisher, and I was like, okay, but the Punisher meets the Joker, you know, and he's a black guy, and that was the thing. Like, for whatever reason, they were just really scared of that, and it's almost like they're scared of, like, black villains. It always felt like, even as a kid growing up, that all the black villains were even more ridiculous than the white villains, and it's like,
David, I mean, can we have a real moment?
Yeah.
It's just me and you talking.
Yeah.
Forget all these other people. I think you hit it on the head. Like, at the end of the day, I think what a lot of other people fear is the idea of the Revelator manifesting in reality. Like, when they're in their closed circles and they're talking about the evils and injustices that they have fostered upon our people, I think they're actually kind of shocked that people like the Revelator haven't come out yet.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why hasn't there been more Nat Turners out there? You know, like, that should be like a fear that a guy like him might become the norm, or more prevalent, I should say. So yeah, I when you say that, I think there's probably some substance to that.
Well, there was a couple other changes along the way. So at one point, I was pushing for the Revelator. We kept going back and forth because I was like, we're not going far enough, right?
Right.
And so at one point, I was like, what if the Revelator is a white guy pretending to be black? Wow. And they were like, and I was like, and they were like, well, why is he killing other white people? And I was like, why did the Manson family kill other white people? They were trying to start a race war. And I actually got into an argument with someone at Marvel about this because they were like, that's not what the Manson family murders were about. And I was like, go back and read your history. Read what Charlie Manson said Helter Skelter was all about. And so these were all things that I was trying to play with. And I was like, let's like there's precedence for all of this. You just need to like know that this is what I'm talking about, and that and like I can give you links to study stuff and read about it. And it was just like there was this whole attitude of, again, one of the prevalent attitudes was we want this to be Court of Owls. Like no other Batman story was going to make them happy. They wanted Court of Owls. And I was like, I can come close to giving you some of that, but not, I don't want to do all of that, right? I don't want to just give you Court of Owls in blackface. That's the thing.
David, I'd like for your next project to be the Nighthawk reborn as the Raven or something. Like bring him back on your own, indie style, with no holds barred. I want to see the unedited version of this character redone. Much the way Kevin Grievous took Blue Marvel and created Darkstorm and put all the stuff that he wanted Blue Marvel to be in Darkstorm. I would love for someday for you to re-explore this character and just let your mind just go. Just do what you want to do. I'm telling you, there's a market there. There's a bunch of chat. If you want him to do the real unedited version of Nighthawk, throw the number 1 in the chat right now. If you want him to do that, because I'm telling you, there are fans out there that would definitely buy it. So you have 3 main villains in this story. You've got the white supremacist people, some of them cops. You got the Revelator, and you got this clown.
Yeah.
You wrote this. When did you write this? 2016?
2015, 2016. Yeah.
All right. So Trump's in office around this time, right? 2015.
Hadn't had the election yet. It was during the election. Yeah.
He was running. But the movement was there.
Yeah.
And this guy, let me just read what he says here. Because we both talk the same goals. We want this city back. We want to make America great again. And we see who it is that's keeping us from the greatness. They're everywhere, standing in welfare lines, illegally crossing the border, and committing crimes on every corner. This guy is, 45, 47, and Elon Musk all rolled up in one. You kind of hit it on the nose, and this is back in 2016 when you wrote this. And it seems so apropos. This guy's one of the villains in your story.
And I'll tell you, what's this is a little bit of trivia. His name is Hanrahan.
Yeah.
He's named after the former district attorney of the city of Chicago, who was part of the conspiracy to murder Fred Hampton. Edward Hampton helped get Fred Hampton murdered. So when I was really getting deep into the history of Chicago and how, because Chicago is a very, very violent city, a lot of gang violence. And part of that comes from the way things were redistricted and they were condemning old public housing projects and relocating people to neighborhoods where on other sides of town where the enemies were, right? It could not have done something more insidious than what Chicago has done to folks. And then there was a Holman Plaza was where they held where prisoners would just disappear. They would just take them down there, they would beat them, they would torture them. And you tell some people this and they're they don't want to believe it. Right. They want Zippity Doodah, Song of the South. You know what I'm saying? They want Uncle Ricky's version of what's going on. And I was just I felt like this may be, I knew that Power Man and Iron Fist was going to be, would be a good book. And hopefully I'd get a decent run, but I tend to treat every issue of every comic as this is going to be the last one I'm ever going to get to write. Someone's either going to fire me or, whatever, I'm just going to disappear. And with this one, I just felt how many other creators are going to have an opportunity like this? And you know, I came into this industry, I got my big break. I was well into my 40s. And so it was like, yeah, I don't have anything to lose. I had a career. I can go back and have another career. And if comics doesn't work out, that's fine. But like, I want to leave behind something memorable. And, you know, all things considered, I wrote relatively few comics for Marvel. I haven't, you know, Planet of the Apes was the last thing I wrote regularly, but I haven't written anything regularly for them like since probably 2017 or so, 2018. And the fact that 6-7 years later, people are still talking about what I've written, 10 years later, they're talking about what I've written, means I achieved my goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why we're doing kind of a retrospective on some of the highlights of what you've done.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you didn't make it just a black and white thing where he's like, I just want to go out and kill and beat up all the white people. His ally is a white cop.
Had to be. Otherwise, you're writing the angry black man as I argue with people all the time about this. I'm like, y'all, I say to white people all the time, you wouldn't know an angry black person if they punched you in the face, because most of them aren't going to punch you in the face. Right. We're good at keeping that rage in check. When we really snap, like, you just need to run for the hills, right? But it's like we've learned how to internalize that rage so much, which is why there's so many substance abuse issues. It's why there's so many broken families. It's why there's the school to prison pipeline. All these things that have worked against us. But at the same time, not every white person is evil. And that's the thing that so many white writers and some black writers do, is they make the mistake of thinking that if you're going to have an angry black character, every white person has to be evil. And that's and just statistically speaking, it's not possible, you know.
Yeah, and it becomes a trope and a stereotype, and it's played out. And it's just,
exactly.
Life is gray. It's not black or white. It's real life is in the gray.
Yeah.
And you know, you can't have a dope ass black superhero without having that dope ass black superhero with a cover where he's fighting the Klan. It doesn't happen. I love the fact that one of my heroes, Dennis Cowan, drew this cover.
Yeah.
I know personally he has a great affinity for the Black Panther versus the Klan cover. So this was a great homage to that concept.
Yeah, no, working with, you know, it's interesting because Dennis has done a lot of covers for a lot of stuff that I've worked on. It's been great working over the years. I just saw him yesterday. I may have mentioned that earlier. I was at WonderCon, ran into him. We were talking. There's a project that him and I are talking about doing. Like, that's the goal. The goal is like to do more than just the covers, like to do something that him and I can work on together. And, you know, and I'm hoping we can make it happen. You know, I think that would be a really fun project to do.
I think he'd be perfect for that Raven Blackbird book I was just talking about. We're still working on the name, but you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, just to wrap this up on night, because I don't want to give away the end, which was rushed, unfortunately, because you know it ended earlier than it should have. You have this foreshadowing here where Tilda Johnson, Nightshade, is talking about, you know, she wants to get in the fight. Yeah. She mentions, I fought Captain America, you know, the white one, not the poser. I love that line because I have issues with Cap Falcon right now. His temporary representation, but I'm not gonna get into that. It's a whole nother discussion. But he says, you know, I can protect the city. Yeah, I've got skills. I'm brilliant. I can fight. And you ultimately do that. You have a series, Occupy Avengers. You bring back Nighthawk. It's kind of like the sort of the continue. You didn't really continue the story because you didn't get a chance to continue that main storyline. But I love the fact that I got to see Nighthawk again, regardless. And have Tilda Johnson. Then you find out in this line that he died.
Yeah,
he was gunned down simply for being black on the street, very unceremoniously. What was the impetus for this? Because I was kind of pissed off, to be honest with you, David.
Okay, so Nighthawk, the series was supposed to be 12 issues. It got canceled. We only got 6 issues, so I never got to do the second story arc. I was fortunate enough that I got the news that we were being canceled early enough to rewrite issues 5 and 6 to give it a solid ending, right?
Yeah.
And then when Occupy Avengers came along and we were putting together the team, they suggested Nighthawk. And I was like, okay, that'll be great because it'll allow me to wrap up this Nighthawk story that I wanted to do in Nighthawk. And what it was going to be was I was going back and forth between whether, Kyle Richmond would be killed or whether he'd be incapacitated. But I knew that Tilda was going to take over as Nighthawk. Whether it's going to be permanent or temporary, I hadn't decided yet. And that she was then going to recruit a lot of the Black supervillains, and they were going to form their own, like, almost like a Suicide Squad type team, right?
Nice.
And so that was what was going to happen in Occupy Avengers. That was going to be a storyline in Occupy Avengers, but that series got canceled early too. And so that was supposed to be 12 issues. It was canceled. We only got issue 9. So I found out when issue 6 or 7 came out that we were only getting 2 more issues. We were getting 8 and 9. And I was like, well, wait a minute. What about 10, 11, and 12? And so what was going to happen was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 was going to be the story of the death of Raymond Kane, Tilda taking over. But so not only was the book canceled prematurely, it was canceled during one of those damn event titles. I can't remember which one. Secret Empire, when Cap is a Hydra agent and blah, 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 blah. And it was like, oh, so I've got to now work all of that into 2 issues. And I was just like, honestly, I was, and I'll be talking about this more when I do my commentary tracks. But in a lot of ways, Occupy Avengers was like the swan song for me, right? There's a lot of people out there that said I was a diversity hire. The only reason I got a job at Marvel was, because of, trying to be inclusive. And I was like, okay, I'm going to prove them wrong. Occupy Avengers was going to be my opportunity to prove them wrong because, Hawkeye, Clint Barton is the lead, and I can do something really special with this. But I can also, because it's a team book, I can bring in marginalized characters that you wouldn't normally see and do something really exciting. Yeah. And I would say of those 9 issues that I did, 3 of them are amongst the best things I ever wrote for Marvel. Yeah. But then but I said, look, man, Occupy Avengers is a terrible title. Can't we call it like, Anarchy Avengers or Underground Avengers or Rogue, whatever. And they were like, no, this title will be great and people will love it. And I was like, no, they won't. Please do not piss on my head and tell me it's raining, right? So there was this whole idea of like, I wanted, again, I couldn't decide if I was going to kill him or if I was just going to incapacitate him. But I was like, there'd be nothing more traumatic to readers, especially, I think all readers would feel it this way, like to have a superhero like either incapacitated or killed out of costume, right? Like just like some sort of random thing, whether they're hit by a car or in this case, like shot by cops, getting pulled over in a stop and frisk sort of thing. So that was always going to be the plan with Nighthawk. But it got rushed. And so I was like, I was so mad. And I knew that this was the end of my time at Marvel. I knew I wasn't going to be coming back, not regularly or anything like that. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to kill him off. Nobody cares about this. I mean, the fans cared. But
I cared, David. I cared. You killed my dude.
It was, and that was the problem. The problem was, like, I can tell you now, looking back, it was a mistake to do it the way I did it, simply because there wasn't enough space. There wasn't enough pages for it to be clear, right? I'd taken what was essentially going to be the final 5 issues of a series and condensed it into 2, while also telling this Secret Empire tie-in storyline, which was just, Clint Barton was the lead character in my book and he was gone. I didn't have him for the final 2 issues. And it was just, and again, I'm not pointing any fingers and saying, oh, they tried to ruin me or tried to ruin this book. Like, this is just how business is done at Marvel, right? And you get these event books, and you'll get a list of all these sort of rules, and sometimes it's like, hey, if you're writing a book and Clint Barton is the lead, it's like, hey, guess what? Clint Barton's going to be a real important part of the storyline, so you got to pull him. And it was just like, okay, so I'm pulling him, and then on top of that, I don't have all these, I don't have the 3 remaining issues. What am I going to do? And there was, if there was ever a time that I was bitter or immature at Marvel, this would have been it. But I also knew, I had talked to them and I said, is there going to be, is this it for me? And they were like, no, we're going to give you another chance. We're going to stick with you until you get a hit. And they had named some other writers who'd had, books canceled prematurely. And they were like, we just haven't got the right combination. We're not unhappy with the work you're doing. We're just unhappy with the sales. And this is the reality of comics, right? Like, you can write the best book in the world. And I'm not saying that I've written the best books in the world, but I'm saying you can write a really solid book, but if it doesn't sell well, you're screwed, right? And at some point, the powers that be, the bean crunchers, are going to say, why do we got this Walker guy writing stuff for us and it's not selling? And the key is like, well, if it ain't selling, whose fault is that? Right. And then you start getting into much more complex issues than and it's not always about racism or the man didn't want to hear from me. It's just like, no, this just didn't sell well. And when you look, Bitterroot just came out. The new issue of Bitterroot just came out last week. We're doing it. It's being very well received, right? It came out the same day as Batman Hush 2, right? And like the numbers between the two, Bitterroot was one of the highest ordered indie books of March 2025, and it doesn't compare to Batman Hush 2. They did all those variants and all this stuff, and the retailers, that's where they sunk their money, because they know people are going to buy Batman Hush 2.
Yeah.
Even I bought it. And I didn't. And here's the thing. I'm going to go on the record, right? This is going to bother everybody. I didn't like Hush 1. I thought it was okay at best.
Right.
And I wasn't clamoring for Hush 2. I wasn't that guy sitting around going, oh, what I really need is Hush 2. No, that wasn't me.
As evidenced by the fact that what's his name, Tommy Kincaid, whatever the guy's name is, he hasn't really shown up all that much after Hush. I mean, he wasn't like a frequently used character. Did it deserve a Hush 2?
Well, I mean, we're talking about an industry that will, ride that dead horse until it's decomposed and turned to dust, right?
We're talking about an industry that is becoming, for the corporate comics, as I call them, they become increasingly, have editors that are increasingly uncreative and lazy.
Yeah.
Just wanting to regurgitate things that have happened in the past. So, well, this is successful, then I'll just throw this out and say this is part 2 and bring in so-and-so to write it and draw it, and we'll make money that way. I mean, it's just...
And they do make money, and the retailers get behind it. But I don't know. I mean, you're talking to a guy who doesn't love superhero comics the way he loved superhero comics when he was a kid. And, most of the stuff that I'm into now it's like not even monthly stuff. It's a lot of like original graphic novels and things like that. And but yeah, the death of Nighthawk it would have been so much better had it been done the way I wanted to do it, right? And then the conversation would be slightly different. Everyone would be still upset with me that I killed the character, but they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I get why you did it,"
Well, you can always bring him back as an original graphic novel, as Predator flying guy. I don't know. We'll work on the name, but original graphic novel, David Walker, some independent label. If there's any independent publishers out there, offer my man a deal. I need a 92-page original graphic novel
give him a hot artist. Have Dennis Cowan come by. If Dennis has the time to do it, have him at least do the covers. You're going to have a hit on your hands. And let's get that story finished. All right. But we mentioned what you're working on now.
Bitterroot. Yep, that's it. Issue 1 just dropped. Today's Sunday. So 4 days ago? Something
4
like
days
that.
ago. 4 days ago. The Next Movement.
Yeah.
We brought you and the fellas on a few weeks ago to talk about it. But we didn't have the full story yet. So now we have it.
Yeah.
1964, Mississippi. Genu still exists, but they seem a lot different. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so, again, the story takes place in 1964. 1964 is like every year in the 60s was very crucial, right? Civil rights movement. But 64 was the killing of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. It was after the March on Washington, but it was pre-birth of the Black Power movement. The Black Panther Party hadn't formed yet. And so there was this, Malcolm X was still alive. And it was just like, I was like, 1964 is the great place to set it. And the idea here is that, I got to be careful not to have too many spoilers, or any spoilers if I can, but the family, the Sangrier family, it's a new generation. There's only one surviving member from the original, 3 volumes of Bitterroot, because it's nearly 40 years later. And we're just sort of seeing the evolution of their fight to stop these monsters, but we're also seeing how those monsters have adapted and survived, right? And as we get deeper and deeper into the series, and I just turned in issue 4. We just turned in issue 4. Sanford is, I think issue 3 is being colored and lettered right now. So we're it's a 5-issue arc, and we go places. We go places that no one's going to expect us to go, and we're going to hint at, and in some cases we're going to explain exactly what happened to some of the other generation. But my goal has always been drop us in 1964, tell this particular story. And then if we as a team can get our act together, there's a lot of stories to be told in that 40-year gap. And It's like, okay, so, the members of the family that we met, the surviving members at the end of issue number 15, there's Blink, there's Cullen, there's Ford, there's Berg. And by the time we get to 1964, Blink is the only one who's left. And I was like, at some point, I want us to tell a story of how did Cullen die? I want to tell the story of how Berg died. I want to tell the story of how Ford died. I want to tell the story of this younger generation that we're meeting. And some of that happens as we move through this story arc, right? And we start to see some of the characters that we're meeting now. There's Mariah, there's E2, there's Sandra, there's Cotton. We're starting to see, as the story progresses, we're seeing them younger in flashbacks, and we will get to see some of the original family members that everybody knows and loves.
All right, let's go through some of the characters we have.
Okay.
We have this young lady first. Who's this?
This is Vonda, and she is, right now, she's just sort of like, she's someone that I'm hoping we can tell a bigger story later, right? So Vonda is Blink's youngest daughter. Blink has 3 kids. And the guy up there in the right-hand corner, Martin, if I remember, I can't remember his name, Martin Wu, is the son of Blink's best friend. We barely see them in this issue. We met Blink's best friend in the Red Summer special. She makes an appearance later. Her name's Wiley Wu. She's from the Wu family, who also fight monsters.
Who also fight, yeah.
Yeah. And so, Vonda is like, there's a huge story. Chuck has this mapped out about them, about these two, about their relationship. But again, trying to plant the seeds for what's going to come later. And she's one of those things, her story is going to come later.
It'd be interesting to see a union between the Sangre and Wu families
and see that go forward in the future. That would be dope.
That's,
oh man, you're really teasing my we're in 1964 now. Black people, Chinese family, 1970s. David, it writes itself.
Well, I'll tell you again, what I'd like to do is get this 1964 storyline wrapped up. And there's more issues. I don't know when we'll get them done after we get issue 5 out. But then the next jump, I want to be to 1984. And I want to be set again in, like Harlem in 1984. It's right across the river from the Bronx. Hip hop is just coming in.
Yeah.
And so we had the Harlem Renaissance in the first, run of the series. Now it's going to be the civil rights movement. And then I want to take it to the 80s and into hip hop and the crack epidemic. That's what I'd love to do.
Okay. That's incredibly dope.
Yeah.
When you do that, and I say when, I don't mean if, when you do that, I need you to have a Red Hot Summer Special #2.
Okay.
Set in 1975. I think it was 75. It was the year, I remember I was living in Brooklyn at the time. It was the year that we had this incredibly hot summer where we had blackouts because it was so damn hot. And there was
78. I think it was 78.
Was it 78?
Was that when the Yankees won the World Series and then there was the rioting and
that's what I'm saying. When the rioting was, do one in that year. It'll be like a Red Hot Summer Part 2, and you can do a little blaxploitation backstory one shot.
Yeah.
And just to fulfill just my own, whatever.
Okay.
All right. So Blink is all grown up.
Yeah.
She said she has a daughter. She mentions a crisis response team. 2 things in this panel. She mentions a crisis response team, and she mentions the Bureau, the FBI.
Yeah.
So first, tell me, what is the crisis response team, or what you can tell us without being spoilery?
The crisis response team is because this is set in the 60s. Because I'm a huge fan, and Sanford and Chuck were all huge fans of Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby more than Stan Lee, right? The crisis response team is sort of our answer to, they're like a cross between Challengers of the Unknown, because the Challengers of the Unknown didn't have any powers, and the Fantastic Four. And it's that era of comics where, and when Jim Steranko was doing the Shield comics and doing Fury stories, and Sanford really wanted uniforms. Like, that's what it came down to. Sanford wanted uniforms. And I was like, they weren't going to get uniforms back in the 1920s, right? I was like, okay, we'll do this in a lot of ways an homage to like mid 60s comics, specifically what Jack Kirby was doing and what Stan Lee was doing also. But Challengers of the Unknown was a big thing for me. So the crisis response team is sort of like our version of, I guess, Challengers of the Unknown, except in this world. And we refer to the Bureau a lot. We know that it's a federal agency, but we never come out and say 100% that it's the FBI, right?
Oh, okay.
And that's simply because it's like, I want people guessing some of the stuff, or I want to figure it out. And this idea, I was just talking to Shelley Bond, our editor, about this a few days ago. I was like, because there's a reference, I want to say in issue 3 or issue 4, to the President of the United States. And Shelley was like, well, the president's Lyndon Johnson, right? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I haven't decided. And we as a team really haven't talked about this. Like, how much is this like the United States? And then how much is its own reality, right?
Okay.
And so I'm playing with some of that sort of stuff. And this is the sort of stuff that drives both Chuck and Sanford crazy, because I'm just like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And, the critical response team, if anyone is really paying attention, what are the initials of the critical
race theory? Yeah, I picked up on that.
That was it. That's where it came from. It was like, at one point we had a very brief conversation after we'd wrapped up issue 15, and Sanford wanted to do something new, wanted to do something different, non-Bitterroot. And he was like, let's do something, we'll call it CRT. And I was like, let's not, because by the time we get the book out, that, who knows what will have happened with that term, right? As I said, Occupy Avengers, part of the reason it landed with a thud was because the Occupy Wall Street movement was already a distant memory. Right. And, a dear friend of mine, Keith Knight, great cartoonist, he had a TV show on Hulu for 2 seasons, and the title of the show was Woke. And it's like, I thought the show was great, but it's tainted now, right? And it's going to be tainted for a very long time. I was like, I don't want to do that. So we're not going to do a book called CRT, but I did like the idea of, let's have the critical response team. Now, let me ask you this. Did you anybody figure out the name of the town, the county in Mississippi where it all takes place?
No.
Yeah. This is the thing I love to do. It takes place in a county, in a town called Ketchicoon.
Oh, jeez. I didn't even pick up on that.
I had just said it out loud for the very first time. And there's no one doing it now because the first issue's out. And but I was like, oh yeah, we got to just give this like the most racist name, because there's towns all over the country, where they've got whether the town's got a name or there's, I live up in Portland, and down in Southern Oregon, right near the California border, there's a river, and it's literally, it's called Dead Indian River. And they finally changed it. And of course people didn't want to change it. Right. And so I was like, yeah, I want to play with this sort of stuff. So.
Jesus. All right. So we talk about some of the descendants of the original family that we saw in volume 1.
So yes, that's so the woman is Mariah. That is the daughter of Berg. And the guy next to her is E2. His real name is Enoch. He is the son of Blink. And she named him after Uncle Enoch, who died in, the other series. Spoiler alert.
Right. And there's reference to the original family. You said we'll address them sometime in the future. What happened to all of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we have these 2 agents of the Ketchicoon County. I can't believe I did not say it out loud. That's why I did not put 2 and 2 together.
Well, because I didn't spell it in a non-traditional way, right? That's what we do as writers. We like to mess with stuff. So,
oh god. So you got these 2 agents from the aforementioned bureau.
Yeah.
I assumed it was FBI, but now it's more intriguing because you said it's not necessarily the FBI. Who are trying to find, the remnants. And this is, it's kind of partially based on some true life stories where you had the Freedom Riders and the disappearance of, Medgar Evers and, people like that.
Goodman, Cheney, Warner. Yeah, they were. Yeah. So it was, there's so many stories there. And yeah.
All right. Wow. Why did the Jinnu seem so much more horrific now?
I can't tell you without.
Okay, don't tell me, but you're going to explain in the future why they seem much more horrific.
There is a we're gonna this story takes place at a critical crossroads in the Bitterroot universe, okay. and it's this moment of where which direction are we going to go? And it's the fight that that the family was having before when we first met them in the first issues of Bitterroot, where Ford was like, we kill them all, and everybody else is like, no, we can't do that. And then by the time it flips, by the time we get to the end of the the 15 issue run, Ford is like, yeah, this might not be the best way to do it, and Cullen is like, kill them all. And we're going to see some of that happen here again.
All right. And Cotton's back. with
Yeah.
these two other people. Do we know who these two other people yet? Are you able to reveal who they are yet?
Yes. The woman is Sandra. She is um, Blink's other daughter, and and then Joseph Joe is the third member there. He's on the right, and we'll be seeing more of all of them.
And that's the uniform that you were referring to before.
Yes.
They got some new gear, some new weapons too, which these work differently than the ones that we've seen before.
We're gonna get into how they work and how they don't work.
Okay.
And so I think that's the best way to describe it.
And then we finally end the book with the sort of the revelation of the fact that law enforcement and the greater society is somewhat aware of the Sangare family and what they do, and there is definitely some ties between them and at least the Bureau. Like there's some knowledge that they exist. Certainly, the local law enforcement knows about the Jinnus, even though they don't know how bad it's gotten.
Yeah.
Is this something that you're going to explore more in the future?
Yeah, that's the part of the driving narrative here is like when you go back to, and someone mentioned Mississippi Burning in the comments. Mississippi Burning was loosely based on the murders of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, which were 3 civil rights activists who were murdered in Mississippi. And one of the things when you study this, the history of this moment was like how there was people in Mississippi who were like, this is all a hoax. These civil rights people are making this up. These people weren't kidnapped. They were never even in the state. And then the reality was it was the cops in this, I can't remember where in Mississippi it was. It was the cops that killed these guys, right?
Yeah.
They were part of the vigilantes that killed them. And so as this story progresses, we're going to start seeing like what happens when you live a lie, right?
Yeah.
And and this is really about not only like the sad part is the relevance that the story has now today, even though it's set 50 something years in the past.
I wanted to talk to you about that. Bitterroot is one of those series that was so groundbreaking and so important. In addition to just getting Eisner's for the recognition of that, which is important and significant. But beyond that, within the community, within the comics community, I mean, this is a story that has been taught at the college level. People will bring it up and break it down. I mean, it's just that layered and well thought out and well written and designed. I love the fact that at the end of these issues, I mean, I have the omnibus, which has a lot of these essays breaking down Bitterroot, and it's fascinating. It's just as fascinating as reading the book itself, honestly, seeing how people break it down. And I love the fact that you have these essays. You got our boy John Jennings here.
Oh yeah.
Talamika Bryce, Ebony Thomasant, Dr. Darius Omar Williams, and they give these really well thought out pieces on Bitterroot. And I'm thinking to myself as I read this, when I originally read Bitterroot and saw this, it was so timely. And now I think about the world that we live in now and, the climate in which we live now. And I wonder if you worry about how it will be received and perceived in the current climate we have in this country. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, do I think about it? Yes. Do I worry about it? I don't have any control over that sort of thing. So I'm just going to make the best story I can make, work with the team to make the best story I can make. We're fairly close in age. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when hip hop was young.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I went into a record store the day Public Enemy's Yo Bum Rush the Show came out. Never heard of these guys before. I picked up the album that day, went home, listened to it, blew my mind, right? I remember buying Eric B. and Rakim's first album, right? I remember hearing NWA and all of them for the first time. And like, if you're not going to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, fearless in the face of terrifying times, get the fuck out of here. You know, I mean, that's just sort of what it comes down to. So, you know, people hate me. There's people out there who hate me. There's people who think that I'm a diversity hire. There are people who think I'm woke or social justice warrior. There's so many things they've called me over the years, but they've been calling me this shit since I was a little kid, right? It started when they were calling me a zebra or an Oreo. And it's like the worst you can do to me is what kill me, I guess, because you know the names you call me, you're not going to buy Bitterroot because it might offend you. Well, fine, or you know, or you're going to burn them. Okay, spend your money, buy the copies, burn them. I don't have any control over that, right? And so, but what I do have control over is how I respond, you know, to what I see and the stories that I want to tell. And in the projects that I'm working on now, as I move forward with my career and my life, it's like I would like to make sure that I leave some semblance of, like, I want to be a troublemaker, you know?
Yeah.
I want to be
good trouble.
Good trouble, exactly. And you know, I was fortunate enough to meet John Lewis before he passed, and I think about that all the time. I think about good trouble. And I think about, you know, I mean, my favorite writer of all time is James Baldwin. You know, one of my other favorite writers is Langston Hughes. Toni Morrison is another one. Like, these are all people, you know, Maya Angelou, none of these people went silently into the night, you know, and they used the power of what they have, you know. Sierra Baxley just says, you know, Nina Simone said it's an artist's duty to reflect the times, and Bitterroot was doing just that. Nina Simone. I mean, you listen to the music of Nina Simone. You listen to, you know, when Marvin Gaye recorded What's Going On, when you listen to almost everything Stevie Wonder recorded in the 70s, like, all that stuff was relevant then. It's relevant now. And they're taking a chance, right? And it's like, I'm old enough at this point, you know, like, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, at least I've tried my hardest, right? I like, people will be able to say, oh yeah, like, he had a bad attitude and he let it show in his work. And it's like, all right, fine.
He was one bad mofo and he spoke his truth. It's important, man. I would dare say that this type of work is even more important now than it was back when the original Bitterroot premiered during the Black Lives Matter movement and what have you. Because the difference between the presidency back then and the presidency now is the question of truth. I mean, truth is now something that's at war. It's revisionist history is a real thing now. It's become legal to revise history, which it's diabolical. Right? Because you're not just messing with us, you're messing with our kids and our kids. And you're rewiring their reality and their future by revising history. So stuff like what you're doing with Bitterroot and making these references in there sparks the mind, because you mentioned Public Enemy. I remember as a kid listening to Yo Bum Rush the Show, and it takes a nation of millions to hold us back, and hearing Chuck D talk about, you know, all these references to Malcolm X, and Elvis was a hero to most, and you know, F. John Wayne, and I'm like, my mind's blown, and I'm like looking up, like, who's this person? Who's this person? And that's what true art is. When you can reflect your times and you can spark the interest in the mind of a young person to think outside of what their current reality is, that's important. And that's what you have with what you do in Bitterroot. And so I would say it's more important that this book, what you're doing with this book now is more important than it was back then?
Well, it's definitely it's sad, sort of heartbreaking when you realize that the relevance, that it's even more relevant. I was in Cleveland, Ohio about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. I was giving a keynote address to a group of young, mostly Black and brown young men. This organization connected with the Cleveland Public Library, and one of these young men asked me a question: what's the one piece of advice I would give to somebody, or give to everybody in the room, as it relates to this particular time and place? And I said, and I say this to everyone listening now, I say this to everyone who's going to listen to it later when it's online, is that every single one of us has to become a historian. Like, we have to do it. Like, right. there's like, how we do it is up to us, right? I choose to bring history in through the works of fiction that I write. But I'm going so far as I'm going to be putting together these little like fanzines, these little short mini comics that are like telling you how to be a historian, like how to fact check, how to spread the word, because like, yeah, it's information wars. Our history is being erased. But this is this is very important. What I want everyone to know, this isn't the first time it's happened, right? It always has happened with us. And it happened, it happened, in the 1700s when they rewrote aspects of what the founding fathers were all about. It's what they left out of the Constitution. And after the Civil War and, after the Civil War in the 1860s, but in the 1870s when Edward J. Pollard wrote, The Lost Cause, and literally rewrote the history. And then pop culture works like Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation and things like that just fueled it, right? That's all we're doing with Bitterroot, is like we're stealing away some of that power, and and it's like, this is why we got the essays in the back. This is why I'm realizing that I need to tell people, okay, this is how you become a historian. You don't have to go to college and get, a master's degree or a PhD. You just have to do what you do. And we spread, it's like history is going to become mixtapes. Right. That's how hip hop came about. Hip hop or history is going to become fanzines. History is going to become blogs and podcasts, and we're going to keep it going. Like there's no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to do it. And it'll be rough times, but the key is, especially for people in our age group, is we really have to show the young people how to do this stuff, because like they're the ones that are really going to be feeling it 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 30 years from now. I don't know if I'm going to be alive 30 years from now. 30 years from now, I'll be pushing 90. I don't know how much longer I've got. So, but right now it's like, oh, I can share some of this wisdom with you, share some of this stuff with you, and use pop culture as a framing point. That's how my career started as a writer, was with my zine BadAzz MoFo. And it's like, yeah, just time to bring that sort of stuff back in a new version. But yeah.
Agitate.
Yeah.
All right. So next issue.
Yes.
Tell the fans what they can expect. Here are the covers.
What is
Hanford mentioned when he was here that these are the cover A's are connecting covers, which are fantastic. What can the fans expect?
Let's see, issue 2. Because I get confused sometimes, because we're working on issue 5 right now. Issue 2, one of the big things is there's going to be a surprise character that shows up, that's gonna shock a lot of people. We get to see that Mariah, who we're seeing here, she really is she's the team leader. She's the one who's out there in the field. She's definitely Berg's daughter, but she's also her own person. And we're going to get to see a little bit more of the 2 agents, but mostly Agent Chase. His name is York Chase. He's going to play a crucial part in the story moving forward. And, but yeah, I'm literally trying to remember like what happens in issue 2 versus what happens in issue 3. And it all becomes a blur after a while, but it's going to be dope. I mean, the end of the day, it's just dope. So
it's going to be dope.
Yeah.
All right. You also have some upcoming works. You've listed a story in Marvel Voices is coming up in May. I think this is the inclusion of your Patriot story that you've done in the past. I think Patriots in this particular issue.
I guess so. I did not know this till you told me about this. So that must be what this is.
We're Black Comic Lords, baby. This is what we do. Godzilla versus Avengers. Now,
Yes.
our producer is a big Godzilla fan. He screamed out like a little girl when I told him Godzilla versus Avengers. He's gonna give me shit about that later. Can you tell the fans what they can expect out of this series?
Yes. So it's a
one shot though, right? So it's a
one shot.
Yeah.
It's 25 pages, and technically it's Godzilla versus, you can tell by looking at the lineup, it's the new Avengers. And there's a series of these one shots, and they all take place during specific eras of Godzilla, right? And so mine is the Millennium era, which was late 90s into like 2005 or 6.
Your boy Bendis's Avengers.
Yes. And so that's sort of, the Godzilla's eras have to line up with what was going on in comics. And so, they came to me, they said, would you be interested in Godzilla versus New Avengers? That now they're just calling it Avengers. That's fine. And I was like, there's a brief moment where I was kind of like, no, not really. But then there's like 3 or 4 people in my life who, like, Godzilla means a lot to them. Right. And I was like, yeah, I got to write this for them.
Is one of those 3 or 4 people our producer? Just say yes.
Yes. And Godzilla means a lot to a lot of folks, right? And honestly, that run of New Avengers, and people can say whatever they want to say about me when I say, because I keep mentioning that Bendis and I are friends. But that was one of the last Marvel books that I really, really enjoyed, was New Avengers. It made me, team books are very difficult to write, but they're also difficult to enjoy for me, because how do you balance the characters out? And I was like, I was just thinking about that run, and I was like, okay, I got to do this. And then the challenge was, because with the New Avengers, Thor's not on the team. Hulk wasn't on the team. Sentry was on there. I didn't want Sentry in my book. But there's literally nobody in that lineup there that could do any kind of damage to Godzilla, right? And so the challenge was like, how do you write this story that is like probably gonna like end in an impasse at best, right? And somebody asked me, they were like, how do you write a character like Godzilla? And I said, you don't write Godzilla as a character, you write Godzilla as a force of nature.
Right.
And so then it becomes, how do your characters respond to that force of nature? And it was a lot of fun. It was, the art has been coming in. I'm really pleased with the art. And honestly, there's people in my life who seemingly don't give a shit that I write comics. But now that this Godzilla issue is coming out, they're all excited. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm cool with that.
Well, you also have a Kickstarter that's coming out. I think our producer will bring that up.
Yep, that's for the death of Bobby Hart you're talking about.
No, there was another one, wasn't there?
No.
That's we got that. All right. So, yes, we talked about Death of Bobby Hart, but here is the actual Kickstarter, just to let fans know you can support the book that he's got coming out. You're at you've already reached your goal.
Hit the goal. Yeah, we hit the goal within 4 hours.
You know why? Because you're David freaking Walker.
Well, it's and because I'm on the road right now, I have my laptop, but I don't have a lot of the files I need to update the Kickstarter the way I need to. But this is a project I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and none of the publishers were that interested, and for a whole host of reasons, and it's like, okay, I get it. You don't think you can sell this, you don't think you can make money off of this. That's not going to stop me, right? And so I saved up my money for a while. I figured out how much I could spend. I set limitations on myself. I was like, the book can't be longer than 80 pages, but if I could get it down to 60, I'd be great. Which is shorter than a lot of traditional graphic novels now. But when graphic novels were first starting to come out in the 80s, late 70s and early 80s, And these things were like, most of them weren't longer than 60 pages. You know, Don McGregor's Detectives Inc. was the equivalent to 2 floppies, and him and Marshall Rogers and all that stuff. Most of them were 48 pages. So I knew I could do it. And I just knew that I wasn't going to let somebody else say, we don't think we can sell this, so we're not going to put your book out. So I just did it myself.
Mr. Producer, stop right there. So one of the things that you have in this is this particular story featuring artwork by one of my heroes, MD Bright.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this? Because I didn't even know there was more work of his out there.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was Fabrice Sapolsky was putting together an anthology called Noir is the New Black. Yeah. And he approached me to do a story, and I kind of hemmed and hawed, and he was like, you know, he said, well, I got MD Bright to work with you. And I was like, okay, I'll do something. And I had this story that I'd been working on for a very long time that was inspired by Donald Goines. I'd started writing it as a screenplay many years ago. It was kind of collecting dust. And then as a challenge to myself, I was like, can I condense what's ultimately going to be like a 90-page screenplay into a 6-page story? And like, this is the arrogance coming in, right? I was like, yeah, I can do that because I'm David Walker, right?
Shout out to Joe Illich. He says that you're the last writer Mark worked with before he passed.
Yes, it was such an honor to work with him. It was so great. And so I got this as a 6-page story. You know, MD Bright, you know, just nailed it. And then Fabrice had said to me, you know, I think this is a longer story. I think you could do something with this. And I was like, well, it started out as something longer. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to dust this off. I was really inspired by it. And then me being a little bit on the crazy side, it began to evolve into something else. And so I put this 6-page story. It's going to be in this larger book, The Death of Bobby Hart. And there's some similarities to this 6-page story and what will be the full story. But the similarities are, it's about a writer who gets killed. And one of the books he's written is The Ghetto Avenger. And that cutting back to part of what he's writing is part of this motif. But the story is so completely different that I think people will appreciate seeing the differences between the two. And I tell people this all the time. I've been teaching for years. You know, if you can't tell, everyone has their idea for their 1,000-page, you know, comic book series, and I want it to run forever. It's like, great, but you got to build up to that. I was like, if you can't tell a story in between 4 to 10 pages, like a really good, compelling story, 4 to 10 pages, then you're never going to be able to do something big, right? Nobody told me this. I learned this the hard way. And I kind of went through this phase about 5-6 years ago where I started writing a lot of shorts. And this particular short that's going to be in the collection, or in The Death of Bobby Hart, was one of the first ones. And man, I got to work with some amazing artists. MD Bright was one of them. I got to work with Michael Lark. There's a handful of others. Gustavo Duarte. Like every opportunity to do a short that came along, I took, which a lot of people would see as a step backwards in your career. But for me, it was like, no, I'm getting to work with these artists and I don't have to pay them. Somebody else is footing the bill. And I just realized, again, if I'm really fortunate in that I'm in a position that I can put stuff out myself. And if you're in that position and somebody doesn't want to publish your book for whatever reason, if they're hesitant, that hesitancy is gonna cause all kinds of problems later on, right? When it's time to market it, when it's time to get it to retailers. And I love the crowdfunding world. And I think that there's a lot of tremendous opportunities. And I believe that that's the future of where indie comics is going. It's not even where it's going. It's here now, right? And if we run from it, we're hosed. I mean, again, going back to, you know, Bitterroot went up against Batman Hush 2. And we sold a lot of copies of Bitterroot, but we're never going to be able to compete with Batman Hush 2 on that level. right? Um, but and it's not saying I'm circumnavigating or ignoring the retailers. Like if they want to carry the book, they can carry it. A couple of them reached out to me. We're going to work out the wholesale rates. But most comic book shops have a limited amount of shelf space, and they have a limited amount of money that they can spend every month. And, I get it. Like you're going to be able to sell a bunch of those, the Treasury Edition size of Hush 2 more easily than you can sell The Death of Bobby Hart. What is it, about the murder of a black pulp fiction novelist? I don't understand that, so okay, that's fine. That's what Black Comics Lords is for. That's what all these different, all of us are for, is to spread the word and know that and they're in here. There's some of this, I know there's people in here. Joseph Illage is a creator that I know really well. There's
Ray Anthony Heights here.
Yeah, Ray. I'm getting ready. I'm having lunch with Ray in a couple days. We're gonna chop some stuff up, and like if I keep coming back to hip hop, right? But the Harlem Renaissance did the same thing. It was like we just create our own stuff and let people find it, right? And that's what it's all about, right? We can't let whatever's going on with Diamond Comics distributors, it was just bought. Like we can't let, like, Diamond wasn't moving that many of our books anyway. And
right.
And I tell creators all the time, okay, yeah, great, you got your solicitation in Diamond, that's great for you, but the retailers aren't going to buy your book, because the retailers are always going to buy 100 copies of that X-Men variant, because they're speculators.
Yeah.
And I can't blame them, but I do feel like, a great comic book retailer is one, when you walk in, they ask you, what do you like? What are you interested in? And it's like, I have what I call the Saga test. If I walk into a comic book store and they don't have trade paperbacks of Saga, I know I can't mess with the store, because the store is not thinking about the medium and the art of comics. They're thinking about the commerce and collectability of something that, there comes a time where, sometimes this stuff doesn't work for some of us anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the moment I fell out of love with the superhero genre. And I never, I don't hate it completely, don't get me wrong, but I remember reading Kyle Baker's book, Why I Hate Saturn, when it came out in the early 90s. And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm ever going to read a comic better than this.
Yeah.
And here we are 30 something years later, and I'm still looking for stuff that, Kyle's head and shoulders above all of us. And that was, I just happened to come along at a time when, when the idea of what a superhero could be was shifting and changing. This was in the 80s. And then, as the graphic novel came into its own, and Kyle was really one of the people that helped push this through, it was like, it doesn't even have to be about superheroes. It could be as about it could be the Cowboy Wally show, or it could be, Why I Hate Saturn, or, or you can go back to Will Eisner's, Contract with God, or, again, Don McGregor and Marshall Rogers did a book called Detectives Inc. Man, that book blew me away when it came out.
Yeah.
And it's still a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Dennis Cowan actually bought me a copy of Why I Hate Saturn by Kyle Baker and said, read this. This is what real books are like.
Yes. This is like comics and graphic novels, whatever you want to call them. They're as good as regular books. They should be as good as regular books. We should be striving to write literature and to write stuff that's exciting. And So,
well, look, I don't want to take up all your time, because I promised to keep you under a certain period of time, and I know I've crossed that. Do you have any time to answer any of these questions? Or
sure, let's throw a couple.
Throw a few questions in here, Dr. Wizard. Have you thought about turning Bitterroot into an anime series?
It was in development as a film over at Legendary. It's not over at Legendary anymore. We're figuring out what we're going to do with it. There's a lot of meetings, and we're just, again, 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, like Hollywood was doing a lot better than it is now. If I'd love to see it as an anime. I mean, I thought Blue Eye Samurai was an amazing show. That let me know what animation is capable of. I think the first season of What If, I haven't watched the other seasons. I love that animation too. So I'm not opposed to it. And we've talked about it. We'll figure it out at some point.
All right. Are you still trying to get a number 13 film made? The animated short film and comic from several years ago is awesome.
That's a great question. Every now and then it comes up in conversation. I don't know. I'll have to talk to, I'm going to be having lunch with my lawyer. I'm down in LA, and, I'd love to, number 13, along with a lot of this other stuff we're talking about, like Nighthawk, all these other things, they're all out of print, right? They're all really hard to find. And so I was talking to Robert Love recently, and I was like, we should do something with number 13. We should, put out our own collection. I'll see what would happen. But yeah. I don't know for sure. Right now, there's no talk of it. And, and again, in Hollywood is, the new Captain America movie didn't do the kind of numbers they wanted it to do. And that's not a big surprise because nobody's going to the movies like they used to go to.
Right.
Anymore, so.
It's still the most successful movie of the year.
Yeah.
Good evening, BCLs and David. Bitterroot, the next movement, number 1 was a great read. Will you be doing anything else with Shaft in the future? That's a good question.
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer to that at this point is it doesn't look promising. I keep trying to revisit the character. I have ideas. And I'm just sort of to the point, like, as it is with Nighthawk, it's like, maybe I should just write my own private detective novel.
Exactly.
So, and if nothing else, here's the thing, like all of these titles that Bobby Hart supposedly wrote, Pimp Wars, the sequel to Pimp Wars, by the way, is called Slaughter on the Stroll. Then there's Confessions of a Junkie. There's all the Ghetto Avengers books. Like, I could just write a Ghetto Avenger book.
I was literally about to say, just write more Ghetto Avengers. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. So I think that's becoming more and more a reality. And so if the opportunity popped up, but I was just talking to someone the other day and I said, I have no control over Shaft because I don't have the publishing rights, and they won't, like, I know the people have the publishing rights. They approached me about something and I said, yeah, I will do this for free. Just give me the publishing rights back long enough for me to reprint the stuff that I've already written and to write 2, maybe 3 more novels.
Yeah.
They weren't interested. And I was like, then that means you're not interested in doing anything good with the character, like, because I just offered you 3 free novels, basically, so we'll see what happens.
Will there be a second issue of The Hated?
Oh my God. That's part of what Ray and
Richard White actually introduced me to that book. Great book.
Ray and I will be talking about that at lunch. If there's anybody who's listening, who's an artist, I need an artist to finish issue number 2. It's about halfway done. Sean Hill wasn't able to finish it. And so I need to find somebody, who can have a style close enough to Sean Hill's that it won't be a total distraction. But if you can't draw horses, you're not going to be able to work on The Hated. So I'm definitely looking for an artist to finish this. And yeah, so we'll see what happens. But it is the fact that The Hated number, we're 5 years in and the second issue isn't out. But it's I would say there's, I think, 14 or 15 pages drawn, and the script is done, and it's one of those unfortunate things that happens. I learned a valuable lesson with The Hated, which is self-publishing floppies is not the way to go. Unless you have the money to have all of them in the can. And I made a huge mistake that way. So,
yeah. When you were doing comics, do you prefer having the panels be black and white like you did for this comic, or in color?
I go both ways. So like with the death of Bobby Hart, there's going to be a black and white edition, just because I love the way Dietrich's art looks in black and white. I love, honestly, I grew up with black and white comics because I grew up reading like Savage Sword of Conan and Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. And, I love a black and white comic. They don't sell that well, right? So this is one of those things. I also love black and white movies. You know, it's just, it is what it is, you know.
All right, we only got 4 more minutes, Dr. Wizard. David,
Okay.
were you a big fan of the movie Michael J. White, Outlaw Johnny Black?
Haven't seen it yet. I have not had a chance to see it yet, so I need to check it out.
All right. Next,
I will say really quick. Someone said, "How do we get in contact with you for the Hated?" Go on Instagram. It's David F. Walker on Instagram. Just reach out to me there. Send me a link to your Instagram or whatever, and we'll go from there. On my Patreon coming up, I'm going to start having artists submit their portfolios to me so that I can share them and then eventually start hiring them to do work. That's a ways off. But I'm always looking for artists. So,
all right. And if you want to get the Hated, it's also an add-on for the Kickstarter, I believe, as well.
And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but that the hardcover omnibus, I believe we're going to do a paperback version of that omnibus. It won't be out till later this year. There was an email thread going on last week about it. And I was like, oh, so this is happening. Just because I didn't want to, we already did the hardcover edition. And I was like, it's heavy. That book weighs like 8 pounds. You know, it's like, let's go with something a little bit lighter. And I wanted it. We talked about the possibility of doing a paperback version of the omnibus and having it timed close to the release of the trade paperback of this new one. So,
all right, this is our last question. How do you and Chuck Brown go about writing Bitterroot?
Oh, we just go about it by fighting a lot. You know, it's no, we throw ideas around. We put them in the mix. And I tend to do like a first draft, and then I hand it over to Chuck, and he'll give me notes and throw some ideas out there. And then it's like, okay, we can incorporate this. There's a scene that he wrote, an amazing scene that he wrote for issue 2 that I was like, this scene needs to be split up into 2. So part of it happens in issue 2, part of it happens in issue 3, and then now part of it is happening in issue 4. But it's really like, a lot of it is just about trying to piece this thing together in a way that is cohesive. And Chuck has great ideas. He really does. He's, he's kind of shy, I guess, or maybe, got like social anxiety. He doesn't like to do podcasts and things like that. But I'm always telling him, like, let's just, it's okay let's have fun, but let's also make the best book that people have ever seen.
Yeah. Well, David, once again, it has been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on our show, on this channel. We hope you come back soon.
Yeah. No, this is fun. I got to do it more, and there's some more exciting projects coming, and my wheels are turning. Like, okay, do I do my own version of a Nighthawk like character?
David, stop teasing me, bro. Come on.
Oh man, some of these questions are getting to me. Is Sisters of Sin in the works? No, I don't think I'm going to write Sister of Sin. It's fun coming up with these titles, and I was talking to Dennis Cowan yesterday at WonderCon, and he was like, "Hey, do you want me to do a fake cover for a Bobby Hart book?" And I was like, "Do I?" And so I think that's going to happen too. I'll email or I'll message him tomorrow. And Craig is working on another one that's going to be one of the stretch goals. He's doing a cover for Slaughter on the Stroll, which again is the sequel to Pimp Wars, and it's about what happens when, after all the pimps are killed, what do the ladies of the night, how do they take over the street? So,
damn. Oh man, I'll take anything you write on a napkin, dude. All right. David, come back soon. We appreciate you, man.
Appreciate it.
Support his Kickstarter. David F. Walker, everybody. Black Comic Lords, we got you.